The snow had a way of swallowing sound, of turning the whole mountain settlement into a place where whispers carried farther than shouts. That night, as dusk settled in like a bruise upon the horizon, Maeve Callahan walked the crooked street alone. Her shawl, frayed and too thin for the bite in the air, clung to her shoulders as if it too feared being torn away. Each step sank into powder that had fallen all day, the world muffled except for the crunch of her boots. But even that simple sound seemed too loud, announcing her presence, reminding her she was the one they spoke of behind doors and under breath. From the porch of the saloon came laughter, sharp, cold, carrying like barbed wire across the frozen street. Lanterns swung in the wind, throwing yellow halos that stretched and wavered in the storm. Shadows leaned together, mouths bent toward gossip. She did not look up, but her skin prickled as though the words were brushed right against her neck. Maeve had long grown used to the judgment of others. It was not the judgment itself that stung but the constant reminder that she had no kin in this place, no shield against rumor. A woman living alone was enough to stir tongues. A woman with a past, well, that was fire for the frozen nights. She pressed her shawl tighter and quickened her pace. But fate, as it often does, steered her toward the very place she wished to avoid. The saloon door swung open with a clap, spilling lamplight and fiddle music into the street. Jed Carter staggered out, his grin gleaming even in the storm. He caught sight of her and called her name like a dare. "Maeve," he drawled, slurring from whiskey, "come on inside. Warm yourself with real company." She tried to pass him. His hand caught her arm. The smell of liquor and tobacco clung heavy, suffocating as smoke. "I said come in," he pressed, tugging her toward the glow and noise. Inside, the room hushed as she stumbled through the doorway, his grip unyielding. Eyes turned, some amused, some pitying, none kind. Jed laughed, a hollow bark. "What's the matter, Maeve? Too proud? You act as if you're better than us, but we all know the truth." The crowd leaned forward like wolves. Maeve's breath came fast. She tugged at his hold, her voice breaking as the words slipped out, words she never wished to say aloud, words heavy with both shame and plea. "I took it off, please." The room stilled. Not a glass clinked. Not a boot scuffed. The fire popped once, then even it seemed to draw back. In the corner sat Jonah McGraw, the mountain man. Alone as always, broad shoulders bowed over a glass, frost still clinging to the edges of his beard from the ride down the ridge. He was known for silence, for the kind of presence that filled a room without sound. When her voice cracked, his hand stilled around the glass. His eyes lifted, slow and deliberate, locking on her. Jonah did not leap up. He did not thunder across the floor. He froze as if the storm itself had turned him to stone. For a long moment, he was a figure carved from shadow, the air thick with the weight of his pause. Then he rose. Not with violence, but with the patience of a man who knew storms better than men. Each step was measured, his boots steady on the wood. The crowd parted without command, without reason other than the gravity of his stillness. He stopped before Jed, his gaze fixed, unflinching. Jed shifted, his grip loosening under the weight of silence heavier than fists. Jonah did not speak. He simply reached, unclasped his own coat, a thick, fur-lined thing weathered by years of mountain winters, and set it upon Maeve's shoulders. No word passed. None needed. Jed sneered, but his voice faltered. "She ain't yours, McGraw." Jonah's eyes did not flicker. His silence spoke clearer than words. "She is not yours either." Maeve trembled beneath the weight of both shame and protection. She could barely meet Jonah's eyes. The saloon, once raucous, now stood still as a churchyard. He guided her to the door with nothing more than the shadow of a nod. No touch, no force, just his presence clearing the way. Outside, the storm met them, colder yet freer than the stifling heat of judgment inside. Snow stung her cheeks as they stepped into the dark street. Jonah said nothing, only walked her as far as her cabin, his coat heavy on her frame, his silence a shelter of its own. At her steps he paused. She fumbled for words, but none came. Before she could force them, he turned and left, his figure swallowed into the storm. By morning, the whispers had grown like frost across window panes. "Did you see her? Wrapped in his coat like a bride in shame. He's claimed her now, mark my words." No woman decent would take shelter with Jonah McGraw. No man either. The town was small and in winter smaller still. Every word clung to the air like smoke. By noon, Sheriff Amos Pike himself found Jonah by the livery, sharpening an axe. "McGraw," Amos said, his voice grave but not unkind, "you best tread careful. Folks are sayin' plenty already." Jonah lifted his eyes once, then bent back to his work. Amos sighed. "You've always walked alone. Don't drag that woman down with you. Jonah said nothing. The axe split clean through the log. At the boarding house, Lydia Boone cornered Maeve with her own brand of concern, sharp-edged but softened underneath. Girl, you know what they're saying? You tie yourself to him, you'll never be free of it. Maeve forced a smile that fooled no one. I tied myself to no one. But the words tasted hollow. She could still feel the weight of his coat, the silence of his defense, the strange comfort that lingered even as tongues lashed her name raw. The snow thickened in the days that followed, burying fences, sealing paths, pushing neighbors into themselves. Yet somehow it pushed Maeve and Jonah nearer. It began with firewood. One morning she stepped outside to find her stack replenished, the logs split clean, neat as scripture. She knew whose hands had done it. She said nothing. That evening she left a pot of stew on the stoop of his cabin, steam rising in the night air, no note attached. Thus began a wordless exchange, an unspoken conversation written in deeds. Jonah mended her roof where the snow had caved it in. Maeve patched his coat where the seam had given way. He left a pair of rabbit pelts by her door. She hung dried herbs on his. Each act small, each act saying what their tongues would not. Yet beneath it all hummed the low, relentless drum of town gossip. To others it was proof of shame, of some secret bargain struck in the shadows. To Maeve, it was the first breath she had taken without fear in years. One evening she sat by her window as the snow drifted thick against the glass, candlelight soft on her face. The town had stripped her dignity before, piece by piece, yet somehow in the silence of one man's steady presence she felt less hollow. Not whole yet, but not broken entirely. Through the curtain of falling snow she saw him pass by her window, Jonah dark against the white, his gait unhurried, his head bowed. He did not look up, yet as though drawn by the quiet of her gaze he paused. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch beyond time, his eyes lifted, meeting hers through frost and glass. No words, no gestures. Only the silence of snow between them, and in that silence a promise not yet spoken but felt. Maeve drew a breath, deep as the storm. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself believe that dignity could be rebuilt, not through defiance but through quiet endurance, and perhaps, through the unlikely kinship of two exiles standing against the cold. And as the snow fell heavier still, she pressed her hand to the glass, her eyes following the mountain man until the night swallowed him whole. The snow did not stop. It fell for days, heavy as silence, binding the cabins and barns in white. Paths vanished. The world shrank until it was nothing but wood smoke, drifting flurries, and the sound of wind pressing against the windows. Yet even in such confinement, whispers managed to travel. Gossip was a stubborn creature, thin, sly, able to slip beneath any door. By now Maeve Callahan's name was on every tongue. Some said she had trapped Jonah McGraw in her loneliness. Others claimed she had been bought, a woman bartered for by stew and firewood. But Maeve had begun to notice something stranger than rumor. She no longer flinched at it. Perhaps she had grown numb, or perhaps she had discovered there were worse things than the world's cruel eyes, like the emptiness she had known before Jonah's silence became her shelter. Still, trouble has a way of returning as relentless as snow. Jed Carter stumbled back into the settlement one evening, bitter with whiskey and the sting of pride. His nose still bore the faint bruise from where Jonah's presence had driven him down days before, and that humiliation had festered in him like rot. He spoke loud in the saloon, louder than the wind outside. "She belongs to me," he said, voice thick, words slurred but clear enough. "I was first to call on her. That mountain ghost thinks he can steal what's mine." The men around him did not answer. Some smirked, some turned away, but all knew the storm was building. Maeve felt it before she heard it. A restlessness in the air, a tightening of the rope she had barely begun to loosen around her own throat. When Lydia Boone came knocking the next morning, snow thick in her hair, Maeve braced herself. "Jed's stirring trouble again," Lydia said, her tone sharp as ever. "He's telling it like you went with Jonah Willing, like you're flaunting it. Folks are listening." Maeve swallowed hard. "It isn't true." "Truth don't matter, girl," Lydia said, softer now. "Only what folks think they see. Don't let that man undo you." Maeve sat quiet after Lydia left. She thought of Jonah splitting wood outside his cabin, thought of the way he never asked for thanks, thought of the coat he had placed upon her shoulders in the saloon without a single word. Something inside her steadied. For the first time in her life she decided she would not hide. That evening, as the blizzard began to gather, Maeve wrapped herself in that same coat and carried a basket of mended clothes to Jonah's cabin. The wind nearly stole her breath, but the glow of his fire drew her like a lantern through fog. When he opened the door, surprise flickered in his eyes, though his face remained still as stone. "I mended these," she said, setting the basket on the table. Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. It seemed they needed care. He looked at the stitches, his broad hands grazing the fabric. His nod was small but heavy with gratitude. He gestured toward the hearth. "Sit." She sat. For a long time neither spoke. The fire cracked, the storm roared, but inside, silence bound them. Slowly Maeve's shoulders eased. She let herself watch him move, his scarred hands, his careful way of placing wood on the fire, his quiet respect for each object in his cabin. It was not love she felt, not yet. It was something deeper than fear, stronger than shame, the first thread of belonging. The storm worsened. Days blurred. Maeve found herself stranded in Jonah's cabin when the wind sealed the door in drifts. She might have panicked once, fearing the talk it would bring, but now she only listened to the sound of his breath across the room, steady and reassuring. On the third night, when her fire at home surely had gone cold, Jonah placed another blanket around her shoulders. She looked up at him, her eyes catching the lamplight. "Why do you help me?" she asked softly. His answer came slow, like a man not used to speaking. "Because I know what it is to be alone." The words settled into her like warmth against the storm. She did not press him further. Instead, she touched the edge of his sleeve, a gesture so small it might have been missed if not for the way he stilled, the way his breath caught. Sometimes, love begins not with fire but with a spark hidden in snow. But Jed Carter would not let them be. One night, when the storm broke for a few hours, his rage carried him to Jonah's cabin. He burst through the door with a cold at his back, his voice cracking like a whip. "She's mine," he bellowed, pointing at Maeve. "You've shamed me, McGraw, and you'll pay for it." Sheriff Amos trailed behind, weary and reluctant, his hand on his gun but his eyes pleading for calm. "Jed," he began. But Jed was already lunging, swinging fists wild with liquor. One struck Jonah across the jaw. Maeve gasped, rushing to her feet. Jonah did not strike back. He staggered once, then straightened, his eyes locked on Jed with that same implacable silence. Jed sneered, drunk on more than whiskey. "You think you're better than me? Think you can stand there, not say a damn word, and take what's mine?" The cabin held its breath. Then Jonah spoke, his voice low, steady as the mountain itself. "She's not yours. She never was." The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. They struck harder than any blow, ringing truer than any fist. Jed faltered, rage cracking into disbelief. He shoved once more, but Jonah did not move. He only stood, unbroken, a wall of silence and strength. Sheriff Amos stepped in then, pulling Jed back, dragging him toward the door as he cursed and spat. The storm outside swallowed Jed's shouts. He was gone into the night, a shadow dissolving into snow. Silence fell again, but it was different now. It was not the silence of shame, nor the silence of isolation. It was a silence filled with breath, with presence, with a new kind of truth that needed no defending. Maeve turned to Jonah, her hands trembling. "You," she began, but the words failed. He shook his head gently. "You don't need to say it." Her eyes filled with tears. Not the tears of fear or humiliation, but of something breaking open, something mended. She stepped closer, and this time when she reached for him, she did not stop at his sleeve. Her hand found his, scarred and rough, and held it. He did not pull away. By dawn the storm had passed. The sky burned pale gold over the snowfields, light catching in drifts until the whole world shimmered. The town stirred, men and women stepping out to shovel paths, to shake roofs free. And from the ridge they saw them, Jonah and Maeve walking side by side into the thaw. Whispers rose as they always would. Some pitying, some cruel, some softened by wonder. Maeve lifted her chin, her hand steady in Jonah's, her back no longer bent beneath their weight. The gossip did not vanish, but it no longer owned her. Jonah placed his hand lightly at her back, guiding but not claiming. She met his gaze once, and in the stillness between them she knew, this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of something she had thought lost forever, dignity, tenderness, a chance to belong.